Hey Rebel Rouser, I'm Alan Voivod and this is Star Wars 7x7. So I'm going to be dividing this up into a non-spoiler and a spoiler portion of the podcast because, well, the reasons will become evident soon enough. We're non-spoiler to begin with, and don't worry, you'll have ample warning to tune out when you want to tune out if you need to tune out. But for now, the headline news is that at the 10th anniversary Clone Wars panel at San Diego Comic-Con, Dave Filoni and company announced some very big news, and shockingly, it was the one thing that I thought they might come up with when I talked about this on Monday, and that is that they are going to finish the Clone Wars. Dave Filoni has always talked about how he was bummed that he did not get to finish Clone Wars the way that he was able to finish Rebels when he was talking about Rebels during Star Wars Celebration Orlando and the fact that the fourth season was going to be the final season and that he was going to have a chance to finish it. He caveated it with the fact that he was like, this is something that I wished I could have done with Clone Wars but didn't get to do it, but I'm gonna get to do it with Rebels, and he was very excited about that. Well, now he's getting his chance to do it with Clone Wars as well. It is coming to the Disney streaming service. The Disney streaming service is launching in fall of 2019. However, we don't know for sure that it is going to launch with these 12 Clone Wars episodes or not. That is not clear yet. And in the additional information that's been coming out from various outlets since the panel ended, that bit has not been revealed either. We just know that the 12 episodes are going to be available on Disney's streaming service, and that streaming service is supposed to launch sometime approximately in the fall of 2019. Now, there have been a lot of story arcs talked about for the Clone Wars that never actually made it to a finished product. The Bad Batch ones and the Crystal Crisis on Utapau, there we go with pronunciation again. So those are two examples where they put the story reels on the Star Wars website in a section called the Clone Wars Legacy. Then, of course, there's the Dark Disciple novel by Christy Golden, which is the fruit of an 8-episode arc of the Clone Wars that was planned, and so it instead became a book. There's no reason for them to tell any of these stories on these new 12 episodes of the Clone Wars. And so that leaves open the question, well, what might those stories be? Well, a hint at one of them has been strongly given with this Clone Wars Saved poster, and the fact that you're seeing a Clone Wars helmet with Ahsoka Tano's Togruta markings on there strongly indicates that this is going to involve a story arc called the Siege of Mandalore. And the Siege of Mandalore was talked about in 2016, and we'll get to that. Also, that's part of the whole spoiler thing. But what we know about the Siege of Mandalore, as at this point at least, comes from the E.K. Johnston Ahsoka novel, where you find out that Ahsoka was on Mandalore fighting with Bo-Katan and the Mandalorians to oust Darth Maul from his control of Mandalore. And ultimately, what happens is Order 66 gets in the way of this whole business, and that plays a part. And so, yeah, I hesitate to tell you any more at this point, at least about the Siege of Mandalore and what we know about it so far. Again, we're still in non-spoiler territory because that stuff that I just told you about, that's already out there, been and done. But not everybody was at Star Wars Celebration Europe, and not everybody watched the live streams of different panels that were at Celebration Europe. So this may not be common knowledge, but there was a panel there called Ahsoka's Untold Tales. And on that panel were Dave Filoni, Ashley Eckstein, who is the voice of Ahsoka Tano, and Pablo Hidalgo. The panel was moderated by David W. Collins. I actually had the privilege of being in the room for that one. That was pretty awesome, to say the least. And during that panel, they talked about Clone Wars story arcs that didn't get done, and they involved Ahsoka Tano. And based on the stuff that they talked about, those could be our 12 episodes for this Clone Wars revival that's happening on the Disney streaming service. Now, this will be the point at which, if you don't want to hear this information, then it's time to tune out, because we're going to talk about what those story arcs are, at least as they were described by Dave Filoni and Pablo Hidalgo at Star Wars Celebration Europe. But hey, if you're cool with hearing about it, then by all means, let's dive right into it. Again, final warning, we are entering into spoiler waters about the potential story arcs for these last 12 episodes of the Clone Wars. So the first story arc has to do with Ahsoka right after she leaves the Jedi Temple, which happened in season 5 of the Clone Wars. And they referred to this story arc as Ahsoka's Walkabout. And where she ends up after leaving the Jedi Temple is down in the Star Wars underworld in the infamous level 1313. And she's going to have to make her way down there, find a way to survive, and ends up connecting with a person named Nix Otami, who ends up being maybe a boyfriend to some degree. It doesn't really become a huge big thing, and it certainly doesn't become a permanent thing, but there is an indication that there is some sort of romance that happens for Ahsoka down there. And Nix is a smuggler of sorts and gets himself into a bit of trouble, and Ahsoka has to help out. And ultimately, Ahsoka is going to be involved with a lot of underworld characters there, but still having to, be who she is, which is not a Jedi anymore, but somebody certainly with a very strong moral center who's going to have to figure out how she's going to exist and survive and make a living of some kind in this environment. So that's one story arc. And then another story arc was described by Dave Filoni and Pablo Hidalgo as a, quote, return to the Jedi, not return of the Jedi, return to the Jedi. And the gist of it is that based on her time in the underworld, Ahsoka, who has sort of become a vigilante of sorts, learns that there is some nefarious stuff going on beyond the scale of just smuggling and all the, the petty stuff, that there is actually a very deep, dark plan happening against Grandmaster Yoda. And part of this involves the fact that she's discovered that at the very base of the Jedi Temple, like when you go all the way down to the bottom levels of Coruscant, underneath the Jedi Temple, that there is a Sith temple under there, and that's going to cause all sorts of problems. And so Ahsoka has to come back up to the surface, has to reconnect with the Jedi to let them know about the plot against Master Yoda. And this whole thing about the Jedi Temple being built on top of the Sith Temple, well, that becomes revealed in this story arc as well. And there's other stuff that Filoni and Hidalgo talked about during the panel, and I'm going to link to that live stream in the show notes for this episode, so that way if you want to check it out, you can check out the whole thing. And then the last story arc is the Siege of Mandalore story arc. And yeah, they talked about this. That's exactly what they called it back in July of 2016. And they pretty much laid it out. So the scene that we see in the Clone Wars trailer where Ahsoka is on a hologram and says, hey, it's been a while, almost happens exactly the way that they described it in 2016. Filoni said that the meeting happened in person, but who knows, maybe the meeting is going to happen in person and this is just an initial reach out. But basically the gist is that Ahsoka's been working with Bo-Katan on Mandalore and helping them try to get out from under the influence of Maul. And they find out that Maul is back on Mandalore, and there's a unique opportunity to try to get him once and for all. And so she reaches out to Obi-Wan and Anakin because she knows that this is a personal thing for the both of them as well. And so Obi-Wan and Anakin and a whole bunch of clones head off to Mandalore to try and take on Maul. And what happens is that Obi-Wan and Anakin get called back to Coruscant because there's been an attack on the city and Chancellor Palpatine has been kidnapped. And so they have to leave in the middle of the Siege of Mandalore story arc to go get involved in the events of Revenge of the Sith. But Anakin's parting gesture for Ahsoka is to tell her how proud he is of her and to say, hey, I'm not going to leave you in the lurch. I'm giving you half the 501st. And so there's a very impactful emotional moment. And when Dave Filoni described this and showed sketches from his notebooks during that Ahsoka Untold Tales panel, Ashley Eckstein got emotional, welled up in tears in seeing all this, but he described how all the troops are there and respond to her being in command, and they all have her Togruta markings on their helmets to show that their allegiance has switched from working with Anakin to working with Ahsoka, and it's just an incredibly powerful moment. And so it seems like based on seeing that helmet in the Clone Wars saved graphics and whatnot, that we are going to get to see this moment fully fleshed out and happening in these new 12 episodes. And then there's one other thing. It was titled After the War, and it has to do with Ahsoka being able to escape Order 66. It's not really explained clearly in E.K. Johnston's Ahsoka novel what happened. That's still a bit of a mystery, but what Filoni says in the Ahsoka's Untold Tales panel is that she is chased into a forest, or what appears to be a forest, and it's not clear whether this is actually happening on Mandalore or somewhere else, but that it's Commander Collins who is leading the clones on the chase to apprehend and possibly kill her. And according to Filoni, it isn't actually a forest. It turns out to be gigantic wolves with very long legs, and they lay waste to the clones, and that is how Ahsoka gets out of everything. But he says it's probably not going to happen like that, and especially considering that we had the Loth Wolves in Star Wars Rebels, I don't imagine that it's going to happen the same way, or even if they're going to depict that at all, they may still leave that to the realm of mystery for the time being. But there you have it. That's the scoop on the final 12 episodes of the Clone Wars, what story arcs they might be covering or might not be covering. Maybe they'll cover one or two, but not all of them. Siege of Mandalore definitely seems like it's an absolute yes, just based on that helmet. And, it's not a lot to go on, but it's a pretty significant clue, I would say. So I'd love to hear your thoughts, whether you think there are other story arcs that they're going to pursue. Drop me a comment wherever you happen to be catching this. And that's going to do it for this show. Thank you so much for watching, as always. And may the Force be with you wherever in the world you may be.